information resources are easy to identify now, easy to acquire, and easy to categorize and organize. And also for our users, very much they're very easy to use as opposed to the past. So for us, it's not the stuff any longer. It must be actually about people. We really need to focus our resources on our librarians and our staff and put them in a position to provide an extensive array of services that prove our value as information specialists and information experts, really to retain that role as a librarian who helps our users understand information and use it. It's not a new concept, but I think it's important to understand that a shift in focus away from our majority of staff who have been based on a collections-based economy within our libraries, largely focused on outside of the library and towards our faculty and students is important. So for me, the future of scholarly communications includes librarians supporting a number of different roles in the scholarly communication landscape. That includes faculty and student publishing, new types of scholarship, new modes of collaboration, new collection strategies. So again, I'm not saying we have to forget about collections because they're still important to us, but we have to have new collection strategies and develop those strategies. And also librarians supporting assessment efforts. So that's big in our institution and is probably as well in yours. We also are exploring, especially within the SCELC consortium, projects to share print. As opposed to resource sharing of print, we wanted to look at how we could share our collections or develop programs where not everybody has to keep every copy of every print book in their collection. So we wanted to look at the same data and find out where our collections overlap and where we might have some projects where we need to, if we need to maximize space, who do we need to partner with to ensure that they have a copy of the print book. So in a way, it's kind of like preservation, make sure that there's retention of a few copies in the consortium, but it's also about giving libraries some flexibility in removing books from their collection, reclaiming some space for users or for other activities, which all of our libraries are losing space to writing centers and technology centers and so forth. Do we just say no? We can't. We're not gonna have the writing center come join the library space because we have to store these print books, or do we take advantage of that opportunity and remove some print books, but have an agreement with our partners that they're going to keep a copy of the book? So this is just a chart showing where Claremont might get some advantage of partnering with particular institutions in order to retain print or give us the flexibility to remove that print if that other institution is going to keep it. So again, it follows a little bit of a zip curve where the larger schools, obviously Santa Clara, University of San Francisco, are some of the bigger members in our consortium. We're going to benefit from partnering with them in order to remove books, or we keep books so they can remove them. But then we have some smaller ones that wouldn't on first glance appear to be logical partners in overlap of collections. That includes Caltech, La Sierra, and Laverne is a university actually less than 2 miles down the road from Claremont. And we almost never interact with them. But looking at the data of our print books, they have a lot of overlap with us. Then also looking at what, as a percentage of their total collection, what institutions have overlap with us. And what's interesting about that is that the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, which has a very small collection, most of it is duplicated within Claremont's collection. So again, if we reached out to them, I don't even know where that is other than it's in San Francisco. But if we reached out to them, if they had a space crunch or wanted to remove materials from their collection and we could retain them and have an agreement with a logical agreement with them, that would could end up working out really well. some research that my colleague Jason Price and I did a couple of years ago. And again, it's important because it is about collections, and it is about new strategies of collections and new ways of interacting with faculty and students, and also publishers. If ebooks, demand-driven access to ebooks, which is pretty much the standard nowadays. Not everybody is doing it, but it's no longer scary. A couple of years ago, it was scary, and what we did was we analyzed a massive data set of usage from an ebook vendor across a number of different libraries, including, I think, the big one here in Texas was in that data set. But anyways, what we found was that we were wondering if user-selected ebooks, DDA or PDA, whichever term you like, resulted in users selecting only books specific to them and nobody else would use them. We found that they were actually used twice as much as the books that librarians bought out of those ebook collections. And then one of the other questions that we had was, okay, well, they're not going to be used as widely across a large number of users. So a student needs a particular ebook. They might use that ebook 10 times, which is the data from the previous slide. That didn't answer who was using the data or the ebook. And so we looked at specific users, and we found that the users user-selected ebooks were used by, on average, 5 other users that weren't that wasn't the original user of the book, and librarian purchased books were used much less broadly. So I always say librarian selected, but that sounds like a value judgment, like librarians don't know what they're doing related to book selection. So we always use pre-selected. But I think it's a pretty clear indication, at least in the ebook world and at least early on, that users are as good at selecting books for the library's collection as librarians are.
The project name, and I'm sorry I got it really far down on the slide. It should probably be at the top. But the project is the Lifecycle Management of Research Data. So not a very sexy title, but it says what it is. And there are 3 partners involved. Again, as Kim mentioned, the Great Plains Network, which is a gigapop. Do you all know that term, gigapop? Gigabit point of presence for Internet 2 connectivity. So there are about 12 gigapops, I believe, in the United States, and the Great Plains Network is ours. And then the Greater Western Library Alliance, who might be associated with Gwilla? Who works with Gwilla in here? So some of you know Gwilla. And then the University of Kansas, which actually I found out several of you know about us as well. Funding for our grant is provided by the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And if you're not familiar with IMLS, they are a primary source of federal support for the nation's libraries and museums. And in addition to grant making, they do some work in policy development and research. Their mission really is to provide broad public access to knowledge, cultural heritage, and lifelong learning. We got a $49,000 grant for a 1-year planning activity. So this is, I want to make sure you understand from the get-go, we are very much in the planning phase as I talk about this grant. Goal with the grant right now, and that is to undertake an environmental scan, which is focused on current national and international data management initiatives and the needs of our members. And there are 3 components to that. There's a literature review, of course, because we're librarians. We also have done some review of just technologies and projects looking at things like Dataverse and Data One and even some of the storage technologies, Globus and iRods and different sorts of things that fall into that technology and or project sort of list to try to get a handle on what all is out there in the environment. And then the third piece of this, which is just about to be sprung upon the 49 institutions, is a survey of our member institutions. Were any of you involved in taking the ARL Spec Kit survey on data management? I had the privilege and opportunity to take that, and it's a very comprehensive and a very thorough survey, and it took me about an hour and 20 minutes after our coordinator for data initiatives had already gone through in the first place. And so we've tried to make this a little bit lighter weight. We've tried to really focus on what's happening in your institution and who's providing the service. And so, and so here's an actual example of the survey itself. And we're sending it to 3 contacts at each institution. We're sending it to the Chief Research Officer, the Chief Information Officer, and the Dean of Libraries, with the instruction that if you 3 want to get together and agree that one person is going to fill that out, that's fine. But we'll also take 3 disparate responses. We think it'll take about 15 or 20 minutes for people, well, no. It'll take 20 to 25 minutes for people to get through the survey. But it basically asks people who provide services like assistance in helping researchers develop their data plans, or who's offering training for researchers in terms of learning how to create those data management plans and the strategies that go with those plans. The IMLS Big Data Summit, but it'll be the first time in which we bring together our advisory committee, and they're going to work with Dr. Mary Lou Goodyear, who has some Texas roots. She was formerly at Texas A&M for a period of time. At KU, she is currently the Director of Public Affairs and Administration, so she has a faculty directorship. She's our former Chief Information Officer at the University of Kansas and former Associate Dean of Libraries, so she's kind of lived in all 3 of these worlds, and she has a consulting company. She is the other half of the marriage with Adrienne Alexander as well, so that works out well for her. She's very, very good at working with groups and helping them think through next steps. And I think that's what it's going to take. We've found one of the most interesting things in bringing together a gigapop, which is technology people and computer science people and researchers with the libraries. We spend a lot of time just talking about terms. You know, I'll throw out something like, well, do we want that to be a dark archive? And they'll say, what are you talking about? What's a dark archive, for example? So we are really appreciative to have somebody who can cut through some of the language barriers and help us focus on the principles. And then we'll be bringing in for that day keynote speaker Bill Mishner, who is the principal investigator for the NSF-funded Data One project, which is housed in New Mexico, but it's a huge project that reaches out to capture information about earth sciences data across the United States. And this is just a list of the universities who are members either through their Dean of Libraries, their CIO, their Chief Research Officers, or in a few cases, another person. And they'll be coming together in Kansas City for a face-to-face meeting, so that's very exciting for us. And our third goal, and this is where the trembling begins for me, but the third goal is to create and disseminate a plan for a scalable multi-institutional approach to research data management. We don't have to build anything. We just have to have a good idea of the directions where we would like to move as next steps for this huge, huge consortium. So it begins in the grand, but it certainly will extend beyond that.
So there's a whole host of resources that you can provide to your researchers. It makes a librarian a research provider, a resource provider. Even if you cannot give one-on-one consultation and show a researcher how to do a data management plan, in the interim, we can at least provide some tools and some links to other organizations that have done just that. So that's the criteria for us right now, is to fit into that role even though we don't have the people and the expertise to give one-on-one advice. So after we presented at the Charleston conference, my executive director began to investigate the DuraSpace eScience Institute. It is actually hosted by a collaboration between DuraSpace ARL, and the Digital Library Federation. And it is designed so that libraries can build a strategic agenda for e-research support. It is a 4-month-long program of coursework, literature review, webinars, and it's broken down into 3 modules. The first module is the context module. This is where you perform a self-assessment, you'll do an environmental scan, and you'll start taking a look at who your key stakeholders are. And what that means is exactly what John was talking about. It makes the librarians get out there and talk to the people that you are serving. But what it also meant is talking to people at a much higher level that certainly than a serials librarian is used to dealing with. So I went out, and there was a team of 3 of us. But again, it's difficult for people to find time to go out and spend the time doing outreach type of work. So I went out and I talked to VPs of offices of research. I talked to VPs in academic technology. I talked to administrators at Centers for Clinical and Translational Science. And I had my eyes opened because I had no idea about the types of research activities going on in the Texas Medical Center. From the standpoint of working with serials and licensing, I don't see what goes on beyond the walls of the library. So it is really important for librarians to go out and find out what's going on. And it was really helpful because that's how I found out about, cyber infrastructure. We belong to a consortium called the UT System Digital System Library. And UT System is actually working on a research cyber infrastructure initiative in which they are trying to build enough bandwidth so that they can have one huge data repository that all 15 UT System campuses can deposit to. And that's a work in progress. It's a huge collaboration. They are actually tied into the Texas Advanced Computing Center, and they're hoping that eventually what this will allow them to do is possibly store vast amounts of data. We also found out that just because we want to offer services doesn't necessarily mean that our researchers want the services that we're willing to offer. Their own institutions have digital repositories. Why should I send that to the library when my own organization has one? Well, that's a good question. It's really hard to find a counter to that. So there's a lot of challenges for us trying to get people to use our digital repository. The Institute was also very good in helping us engage with other universities and libraries and discover that they too are having some of the same barriers to expanding e-research support that we are. Some of them were way ahead of the curve. University of Michigan was one of those that was way ahead of the curve. They are really branching out as far as helping their researchers set up profiles, helping them with data management plans. It's amazing to talk to all the different institutions and find out where they're at. But most of us agreed that e-science in itself doesn't mean anything to anybody. Nobody really understands what it means. I asked several of the researchers I talked to, I said, do you know what e-science means? And they said, no. It's more than just big data, but defined, e-science is about using the technology to store vast amounts of research data. E-research is the researcher's use of the digital technology, the computing, the networks, to share the data. So even though the eScience Institute is called eScience, they're really focusing on e-research.
So let's talk about the economic reality of what we face here in Texas. The reality is TechShare funds, our funding for TechShare has been changing since 2002. Since the TIF funding was scaled back and eventually ended. TIF funding was the Telecommunications Infrastructure Fund. Originally, TechShare had a huge influx of funds back in the early 2000s, and that was what funded our original huge purchase of database resources. And originally, TechShare really didn't cost our members anything. You had a huge suite of resources that we were able to give free to our member institutions. But as TIF funding faded away, more and more of our funding came to rely on three different streams of funding, mainly GR or state funding. We call it general revenue because that's the funding stream that comes from the state. So it was GR, then member fees, which were instituted in 2003, and LSTA money. That's Library Service and Technology Act funding from the IMLS. But as times have changed, even that funding cycle has become somewhat problematic, especially as we become more and more dependent on federal funds, because federal funding in of itself has also become much more problematic. You've become to see more of a decrease in federal funds, and also you've been seeing now federal funding become frozen. It's very hard for us to do the planning cycle that we need to do. At TechShare, we are already planning out, and we're required to do planning for at least 3 biennium sessions out. So that's 6 years out. But when you're in this type of cycle, when you don't know what your general revenue is going to be, you don't know what the federal funding is going to be, and you see these cycles of almost roller coaster funding coming in from the state, from federal. It's very difficult for you to plan, and it's very difficult for you then to communicate with your member institutions, who are, especially the very large state institutions, small state institutions, but state institutions who make up a large part of our TechShare membership, what the funding cycle is going to be. So that caused us to want to be able to partner with other consortia to be able to give our members other options, to be able to open up resources for them so they can use their funds more wisely. One of the few things I really know about is that libraries really want to spend their money wisely, and they want to protect the resources that they have. Libraries are very protective of the fundings that they have. If one library in Texas wants to join SCELC, maybe SCELC has something that other libraries want. Because believe it or not, Texas matches up with California very well as far as demographics go. Now, SCELC only is for private universities. It's the only people that can belong to SCELC. That's who they market their resources for, their databases for. But I can maybe do something for our private universities here in Texas. We were going to the I was going to the Charleston conference, Rick was going to the Charleston conference. I said, let's meet in Charleston, let's talk about it. So we did. And we said, let's just pursue this. Maybe there would be some publishers, like Kim said, not every publisher that SCELC deals with was open to this. But Rick said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk to some publishers and see if they would open up their contracts to TechShare and see if they would be willing to open up their contracts to TechShare members. And there were some people, because it's more market for them. And see, that was one library, Abilene Christian University, and they were willing to and publishers were willing to take a risk on that. So that's where it all started. So it has to be, what I learned from this was it has to be library initiated. The good thing are the offers and the contracts, because again, we don't have the large staff at TechShare. The offers and contracts are handled and marketed and pushed out by SCELC, and SCELC handles everything, and I really don't have to do anything. I just push it out to the 50 members that are eligible for TechShare. So what does this look like since 2009? Since 2009, 21 of the 50 TechShare eligible institutions have participated, and we've seen a cost avoidance and savings of $33 million for the, yeah, it's significant. Our libraries have had a much greater selection of resources than what I've ever been able to offer them. And what I would like to see and what I would hope to see are that the other eligible institutions would take advantage of these. I mean, that's my hope. So I keep pushing the offers that Skelk sends my way and keep hoping that soon maybe all 50 the eligible institutions would take advantage of the offers that Skelk sends me.
But it really is looking at, all of the things that we heard about data management and partnering with your faculty. And it really kind of hit home when Wrestling came up and she said it has to be member driven. You have to listen to your members. It's the same thing in a library. You have to listen to your faculty, and they need to help drive what you're doing. But as you think about the day, are there things that publishers like Springer and, for that matter, Wiley, Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, any other publishers out there, are there things that we should be doing or thinking about as we start to move into this more cooperative library idea and dealing with all of the data that's out there? As publishers get their content more stabilized and it just becomes the day-to-day grind of publishing content and selling content and housing content, we really are looking at what do we do next and what is the next thing that we get involved with on campuses. So keep that in your minds.